Beggars and takers. It is a splinter of love, the light shining in a million fragments through the forest trees. When thoughts subside, presence becomes a house of light. Love captures me in its net. Though love is not external, it is inside me, emanating as a sun. Once crawling, now taking flight, a great feeling consumes me. Out of the dark night, coyotes pay me no mind. I am one of them. And the possum family passes by. I am one of them. And the faces on sidewalks and the beggars and takers of the concrete world, I am one of them. A sea of love washes over beaches where love may begin. Out of the dark night of infinite stars, the northern lights also reach us. We enjoy the colors in silence. If we used words, we'd muddle the feeling of love for the mystery and beauty of everything.
Welcome to the Only Words podcast, where poets and poetry lovers talk about the role of the art in their lives and the modern world. Joining us on this episode is...
Hi, I'm Levi. Thanks for having me.
When did you discover or were introduced to poetry?
I was first introduced to poetry in school, like everyone else, but I don't think I liked it at the time. Maybe because it was more of a focus on old styles of poetry. Usually it's an over-focus on rhymed poetry, and then you read and write in that way in school. But I don't think I liked that type at the time, even though I like Robert Frost and Longfellow and other poets that tend to rhyme. I think I didn't really write at that time. Later on, I got into writing in about 12th grade. And at that time, it was more of reading banned books and kind of writers that kind of are underground, at least at that time. And I think it was Bukowski who got me into poetry, Charles Bukowski. But yeah, my writing style is definitely, and my themes are definitely not like his. But it was far different because it's a free verse style, similar to Walt Whitman's, but more conversational, more rebellious, which was attractive to me at the time. And then from there, I got into more popular poets, but also some niche poets like Robert Lax. For the more popular ones, it'd be Mary Oliver. And then I'd read Khalil Gibran, Carl Sandburg, and those were big influences on my poetry. That's what got me into writing it. I first started writing poetry as love poems to a girlfriend, an ex-girlfriend, in high school. That's the beginning. There's not much else to it, but after that relationship ended, I didn't write for years. And that was 10th grade, and then I went back to writing in 12th grade in high school in the senior year. And then it was more like short stories at the beginning, and then I gradually reduced it to poetry, and then I stopped writing for years and then went back to writing poetry. And now I've been writing for, I'm not even sure, about maybe 8 years or so. Now I write every day, and I don't think I'll ever give it up.
Do you recall the first poem that really moved you? How did it affect you?
I think the first poem that affected me was Nothing Gold Can Stay by Robert Frost. I think I'll read it and then explain how it affected me. Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold, her early leaf's a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf, so Eden sank to grief, so dawn goes down to day, nothing gold can stay. I like this one because it talks about how everything in life is temporary, but he seemed to focus on all parts of life from beginning to end, such as the first green, which is gold, but he says that it's only so an hour. And I thought that was a short poem of his that made a big impact on me early on, as well as some of his other poems. But this one is one of the more memorable ones.
What does it mean to you to be a poet?
That's a good question. What does it mean to be a poet? I would say that it's not just writing poetry, it could be a more broad area, a broad view of just seeing everything as if for the first time, like a child does. And then once you get into that state of mind where you see everything as if for the first time, you'll see everything as a miracle. Then you will look at nature, you'll look at maybe a flower on a cactus, and you'll realize how amazing that is for a flower to sometimes even thrive in extreme heat, especially where I live currently in Texas, where you might see flowers in a drought in this really dry area where it's all limestone, and you see wildflowers and cactus. So to be a poet, I think it's mostly just to see everything as kind of a miracle. And nature is easy to do that. Then you could feel that sort of poeticism of life. It's just that a poet puts it into words as best as they can. That's what I think it means to be a poet. It's more of a feeling than an action. The poet just wants to put it into words and kind of bring this universal feeling and feelings, emotions to the world.
What do you think poetry can do that other forms of literature perhaps cannot accomplish at all, or just not as well?
I think poetry can deal with strong emotions a little better than short stories and novels, but only if it's very personal, such as love poems. Pablo Neruda's love poems, I think, demonstrate that because he directs it to the person, unlike a book where it's two characters and you don't feel as much for them. But for a poem, if you're on the recipient side, if someone's writing a love poem to you, it feels far stronger, more personal. So then it's not just about love poems though. The poem, if it does it correctly, it could kind of bring out emotions in the reader, such as nostalgia, or in an imagistic poem, it might be you feel as if you are there. And if the poet uses all their 5 senses or more, because I was reading that there actually are more, and I wasn't even aware. And if they just use, many of their senses, the reader will feel as if they're there, and that might evoke emotions, many different kinds. It might be a memory of the past, of childhood or something. So then I think the poem, it could be very personal, more personal than short stories and books. So I would say it's better at communicating strong emotions, but that also requires the reader to be sensitive to life.
How do you approach writing poetry? Or do they simply come to you?
I usually write at the same time every day. But sometimes I'll write when inspired. So I guess I don't really wait for inspiration. I could just go looking for it everywhere. Sometimes I'll think of what's happening outside or what I've been experiencing lately, and I'll write about it. Usually has to do with nature, so I'll write about the season that we're currently experiencing, and then write a poem about that. I usually try to use all of my senses, so I'll use all the 5 senses at least, or at least a few of them, and in that way it becomes more imagistic, and then from there I might add meaning to it. But it's usually something I don't really plan ahead. Things just kind of connect naturally when I start to write. But at the very beginning, I might start to write just on a basic idea. Lately, I wrote about a bird. I think it was the European honey buzzard. And I hadn't really thought about it until I started writing the poem. When I was writing about migrations and butterfly migrations, where they migrate, the monarch butterflies migrate from Canada to the US, and some of them go to Mexico. And then I thought of the honey buzzard, which goes from South Africa all the way to Finland. And then I might add meaning to something like that, which is what people kind of do naturally, not just poets. And that's normally how I write. Sometimes it's spontaneous, though.
Do you write with a reader in mind? If so, is that reader someone you know or a composite?
I don't usually write with a reader in mind, but if it's a romantic poem, I'll be, of course, thinking of someone, and then I'll use usually the pronouns such as you, and then I'll write the love poem in that way because it's more personal, it's directed to that person.
Is there a particular place or setting that regularly sparks your creativity?
Well, where I currently live, that's usually what I write about, which is the Texas Hill Country. But if I live somewhere else, I just write about that other place. But I've also written about past places, such as New Mexico or Colorado or Hawaii. So it really depends on what I'm feeling like writing about. But usually it's about where I currently live in the natural environment. But a particular place might be a pond nearby. I've written about that. Sometimes I'll walk to this pond, which is on a golf course, but I'll walk it once the golf course is closed, and then I'll see all sorts of animals out there. But sometimes there's coyotes at night, but I go before it gets dark, and I'll see deer and owls and snakes, rabbits, and turtles, so that sparks a lot of poems.
What would you say has been the most surprising or unusual source of inspiration for your work?
I think an unusual source of inspiration for me has been the drought in Texas and the extreme heat. I would go outside when it was above 100 degrees, and I might find colorful birds like cardinals, or I'd see rabbits or deer or squirrels or flowers, and it kind of gave me hope that they were surviving even in these extremes. And yeah, that was a bit surprising, because when it's that hot out, it's pretty unbearable when humidity is high too. And then you get warnings from the weather app about going outside. But I still found things to be optimistic about.
How has your writing evolved over time?
Well, I first started writing love poems, so I am branching out into other areas. But the love poems were back in high school. But I still write those. These days I focus more on nature. And even nature sometimes blends with love, because it can be more like a universal love for, flowers or something. Things in nature that you enjoy, mountains or the ocean or trees. So sometimes they blend, like Pablo Neruda's poetry, where he'll use nature elements in his love poems. So it's evolved into, sometimes it becomes spiritual. So I noticed I focus more on spiritual ideas too, where I'm pretty open to any spiritual beliefs. Then it became more about combining all these things together. Then it becomes more universal. While at the beginning, when I started writing more, it was too emotional and more kind of plain. Now I mix a lot of elements together and I develop in that way. And I always try to improve. I might read books on how to improve my poetry. So I think if you are developing your craft, it does get better over time. Just like some writers, their best work is sometimes at the end of their life.
How do you know when a poem is finished?
I'll know a poem is finished when I know I can't really improve it in any way. But sometimes it's kind of intuitive. I think my issue is I don't write enough, which is probably unusual. Most people might write too much, so they have to edit down. I usually don't write enough words, so I usually have to tell myself to explain further. I think I leave out too much, which makes the poem too vague, and I don't want that, so I'll know a poem was finished when I've said all that I wanted to say. But it will never be overly long. It'll usually just be a page long, never really longer than that.
In your opinion, what makes a poem successful?
I think a successful poem evokes an emotion in the reader. It might be nostalgia or hope or even fear or love, but I think it has to have an emotional effect, just like a song does, and any song is a poem. So I think the best poem is something that creates a strong emotional reaction.
Is there a poem of yours that's often misunderstood or misrepresented?
I'm not sure if there is a poem of mine that is misunderstood or misinterpreted. I think that's bound to happen to every poem and every song, every book, every piece of art, even paintings that might have meaning behind them. I think everyone will interpret a poem differently, but I think it'll be pretty close to what I want. But then again, I don't really force anyone to understand me. I don't really mind if I'm misunderstood in my poetry, but I think if someone, even if they don't think too much about the meaning, but if they just enjoy the poem itself, I think even that's okay. But I will have meaning hidden behind each poem, usually each line. So if people do want to read into it, they can. If they don't, that's okay too.
What are some of the things you love most about poetry?
I think what I most love about poetry is its impact on the reader. Because some people, they might even get tattoos of poems. I've heard a couple people get tattoos of my poetry, at least ones that told me, and that was really just, well, I'm grateful for it, and that gets to the question about, a poem can impact you so much that you get it on tattooed on your skin, and I think that's good. And then some people might get it tattooed on their soul, which is maybe a funny way of saying it, but it just has a lasting impact on the person. They might even remember it their entire life, from childhood to until they pass on. And it's easy because it's usually, each poem is pretty short, usually a page or two. So that becomes something that can be easily transportable. Usually a poetry book is pretty short. You could read it, it could have an impact on you immediately. You don't have to wait for, reading a 500-page book like East of Eden by Steinbeck. That's one of my favorite books. You can, instead of reading a book that long for, weeks, or you don't have to for a poem, you could just read it, and then it can have an immediate impact on the person. And usually, if the poem is enjoyable for the person, it could be something lasting. It could last 100 years.
What has been the most rewarding part of your poetic journey so far?
I think the most rewarding part of my poetry journey has been people just enjoy my work. When I started, I think I shared poems on social media, on Instagram, and gradually, you might send poems out to magazines, and You might get people buying your books and enjoying them, and people get tattoos of your poems. That becomes all exciting and rewarding, but it's seeing others enjoying the work, and then the poems I write become more about their life, the reader, and then the reader has a big impact, has a big positive reaction to the poems, where they might, keep your book forever, or they simply just enjoy my work. And then having that where people enjoy your work, I think that's the most fulfilling.
Do you have a favorite poem? If so, what makes that poem special for you?
I don't have a favorite poem. It's hard to really put them into numerical order and say this is my favorite one. I like a lot of poems. Carl Sandburg is one of my favorite poets. Robert Frost and Mary Oliver and many others. But one poem from Carl Sandburg is called Sleep Impression. It's a short one. I'll read it and then I'll explain what made it special for me. The dark blue wind of early autumn ran on the early autumn sky in the fields of yellow moon harvest. I slept, I almost slept, I said listening, trees you have leaves rustling like rain when there is no rain. Carl Sandburg is a big influence on my imagistic poems, where I try to kind of create a scene where the reader feels as if they're there. And I like the mood of the poem. I try to evoke a certain mood in the reader. When I write a poem, I want them to feel something that I'll feel in this moment. So in this poem, it kind of has a strange feeling to it of the yellow harvest, and then it's windy, and there's a dark blue sky, and the field is flowing in the wind, and the leaves are rustling, and the leaves sound like rain. And then he was saying that he tried to sleep, but he couldn't. And then it seems to enjoy the scene, enjoy the sound of leaves that sound like rain. I like the mood it gives.
Do you have a favorite poet? If so, what is it about their work that you love?
I think my favorite poet would be Khalil Gibran. I've read all of his work, and I think what I most like about his poems are they're spiritual, and they bring up questions in the reader, questions that you might have to go out seeking. I think that was his purpose, his reason for writing him in that way. Especially Madman, The Madman, is one of his poetry books. And that had a big impact on me, which caused me to seek out more of his work.
Is there a poem by another poet that you wish you had written, and why?
I don't think there is a poem by another poet that I wish I had written. Maybe it's my ego, but I prefer to write my own work, my own poems. Everyone has their own kind of journey to where they are today. So you're a combination of everything that you enjoy. So I don't think there's anything I would want to call my own. Just my own work, which is a mixture of all the poems that I do enjoy.
Is there any advice you wish you had received when you started writing poetry?
Any advice I wished I had received? Well, maybe just some guides on, what to do. I don't have any mentors or anything, so I just kind of figure things out on my own, but I know that some people do have mentors and they'll help you get published in magazines and get your books published, or they'll tell you how to go about it. I mostly just figure things out on my own. So having some sort of advice from someone more experienced, I think, is worthwhile. These days, I just figure things out as I go along. I think having someone kind of give you encouragement definitely helps. But I guess I don't really need it because I enjoy writing, so I don't really need encouragement at the moment. It's just something I enjoy doing. And if you enjoy what you do, then that's a good career.
What advice would you give to someone just starting out with writing poetry?
If the writer is just starting out, I think just writing itself is the best thing to do. You'll make all sorts of mistakes, but that's part of the path. I think you just have to keep on going. And if there's something good in you, I think it'll come out naturally. I don't think you have to force out anything. Even though I write at the same time every day, I never force anything out. It just comes out naturally. So I think if they persist, more and more, good things will come out of them, as long as they don't give up.
Is making your poetry accessible to a wider audience important to you?
Well, I think relating to the reader, I think, is important, and that would be through the subject matter. If you're focusing on something common like love or nature, it's bound to reach a big audience, I would say. And if you're writing about, war or genocide, of course, that'll be popular as well, and that'll reach the right people, because usually someone who reads poetry is pretty sensitive to life, to emotions. I focus on mainly nature and spirituality and sometimes love, and I think everyone knows that's a pretty big audience, but not always. Not everyone is in tune to spiritual ideas. So sometimes I think I have to seek out specific groups in order to reach the right audience. At the moment, I'm not sure who my audience exactly is, but I think I'm getting closer to figuring that out.
What challenges do you think poets face in the age of social media?
I don't think there are many challenges in the age of social media for poets, because you might have some people steal your poems. I've heard of that. I think one or two people did that for me that I know of, but I think it was just people just sharing my poems, and they just cut out my name but didn't give me credit or anything. But overall, such as this one poem of mine I found someone shared on Facebook But it showed my name and everything, but I didn't know about it for 6 months or so, because I found it on Pinterest, that someone had shared it on there, and then from there I clicked on it and went to Facebook, and from there I saw that it had more than 40,000 likes, and that made me realize that social media can really share my work very rapidly, and a lot of people were sharing that poem. I think over 20,000 shares, and then that made me realize social media has a lot of benefits to it. But I don't see many challenges for social media, besides the chance of it being poetry being stolen. I guess being visible may be difficult, but yeah, I've had some poems go viral, but some not. And I don't know why that happens. I don't understand algorithms or anything. So sometimes it does seem like you have to write a specific poem for a specific social media app, but I don't really play those games. I just share my work, if no matter what, if I get likes or not.
What do you hope readers take away from your poetry?
Well, I try to evoke positive emotions in the reader, so I think the answer might be as simple as that. That's what I hope readers take away from my poetry, that they might have maybe a realization of something. It might be a feeling of calm. Since my nature poems seem to be about calm things, I try to evoke a calm feeling in the reader, and I hope my poems are kind of like a refuge from troubles in the world, kind of like an antidote to the news or anything bad. I hope the poems kind of relaxes the reader. That's, I think, the main thing, but there are deeper meanings in my poems that I would hope they might look into. But even if the poems are just something that's entertainment, even that I think is a great thing, because even just enjoying something is a positive benefit. Even if someone wants something to be more than that, just someone enjoying your work is worthwhile.
How would you like your work to be viewed by future generations?
I would like my work to be viewed positively by future generations. Yeah, I'm not too sure how I would like to be viewed. I don't really think too much about opinions about me, but I just hope that they thought of my work as something they enjoyed, something they liked. Hopefully not kind of its time, where you might read an old poem and it'll be written more than 100 years ago. It might be 150 to 200 years ago, and you can't really relate to it. I think my work, I hope, is more universal, and that it can be understood by future generations, and that they view it as something that they enjoy.
What would you do if you couldn't write poetry?
If I couldn't write poetry, I think I'd do something else that's artistic. It might be painting or something like that, or it might even be something more like even be construction or something like that. But I had thought for a while to be one of those guys that goes on the wind turbines and they go up and fix them. For a while I had thought of doing that. That would have been done in West Texas, but I decided not to. And my degree is in finance, but I never really applied it. I applied to many jobs, but I mostly just got accepted into running for a nonprofit, and then for a tech company. And now I work for myself, doing many different things. So if I couldn't write poetry, it might be something artistic, but I'll never know. I just kind of go with the flow and see what works, and keep doing what's working.
Is there a poem you'd like to read?
Sure, I'd like to read one of my haiku poems. It's the one I mentioned earlier, that was shared on Facebook and went viral, which caught me by surprise because I wasn't told that it was shared and liked by about 40,000 something people. I'll read it. The world is absurd, but I still cling to its flowers like a bee drunk on spring. This poem is one of my favorites, and it's probably my most popular poem so far. And I think it's kind of encompasses the main thing I focus on, which is focusing on positive things, where you might read the news and you might see people fighting wars, genocides, nonsense, it's really terrible things, but I focus on positive things.
Where can listeners go to find your work or learn more about you?
You could find me at lukelevi.com, also on Instagram at lukelevipoet, and Threads and TikTok, and you can find my books on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and many other online stores. And thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Only Words. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review, check out other episodes, share this podcast with anyone you think may enjoy it, and most of all, please do join us again next month for another conversation about poetry. Until then, live compassionately, love always, and read more poetry.